right, I'm going to try talking from out here because this feels sort of very so I hope you'll be patient with my PowerPoint navigation here. So I'm Laurie Matheson. I guess I didn't introduce myself before, but I'm the director of the press. I'm also the music editor there, and I've been at the press since 1996. I started as a graduate student and kind of zigzagged my way through marketing and acquisitions, various fields, history, sociology, Asian American studies, and to music finally, and then became editor-in-chief and now oversee the press as a whole, which, as I said, is about 40 staff and lawyers and journalists. And you are here today, so thank you for being here. So my task here in the next hour or so is to give you kind of a tour of the scholarly publishing process and talk about some of the issues that that are arising in the landscape of scholarly publishing at this time. I called it Demystifying scholarly publishing because we often get this feeling when we go out and do publishing talks that well, we've heard the scholarly publishing process described as a black box, so there's a lot of things going inside, but nobody's exactly sure what they are, and nobody's exactly sure how to open the box, or how to approach it, or how to take out the things that are in it and interact with them. So we're going to try in the course of the day, and especially this talk, to kind of break that down a little bit. This next, there we go. There we go. I just want to, before I get sort of launch into the main thing, this is a little infographic, is that what we called it? Infographic that we made for our centennial, which was last year, trying to sort of capture a few of the sort of numbers that would give a sense of some of the things that have been accomplished over 100 years. So titles in print, number of published books, the tenure, the longevity of our journalist program. The AUP is our professional association, the Association of American, not American any longer, Association of University Presses. They just took the American out of the title because it's really working very hard to recruit a lot of international presses to the ranks. Kind of the international breadth of the program in terms of where our authors come from and the languages in which our books are available and journals are available. So first, as many of you are probably working on writing projects right now, either articles or books perhaps, perhaps revising dissertations. The first thing you want to think about, or one thing you want to think about in conjunction with preparing a proposal, which we'll talk about in a little while, is how to identify a press that's going to serve your work well. And that pertains whether you're looking for a journal to publish an article in, or looking for a place to, the right home for your book project. So you want to look at a number of things about the press and think about how those dovetail with the needs of your work and the field that you're working in. So you want to look at what kind of reputation and profile the press has in your particular area, and even in a subfield of your area. So, for example, we publish a large list in music, but we publish very little in European music, classical music. So, if your work is in French Renaissance music, there might be another press that's more suitable, that has more of a strength in that area. Current investment in the field, by that I mean how much is the press actively publishing in that area at the time, at this particular moment. Every press sort of has the lists that come and go, so areas that they might at one time have a strength in. It often has to do with whether there's an editor on the staff who has particular expertise or specialty. For example, we used to have a list in medieval studies. We had a very accomplished medieval scholar on our staff, and when she left the press, along with the way that market was changing in relation to what we were doing with our press, we decided to discontinue that part of our program. So that happens all the time. So just because a press published a lot of books in your field 10 years ago, you need to check and make sure what they're publishing now. Kinship with your project, that just again has to do with finding a press that speaks to where the, there's a, for example, a methodological kinship. Some presses are much more oriented toward a theoretical approach to scholarship, for example, and others more oriented toward an ethnographic or archival foundation for their work, a more empirical approach. So you want to be sure that the particular strength of the press really is going to support what's really distinctive and important about the work that you're doing. A lot of books are published in series, and that's another thing to think about. If you have a piece of scholarship that fits very well in a particular series or a particular press, that can be a very good home, and that's something to articulate when you approach a press, is how your understanding of the profile and the purpose of that particular series meshes with your project. The overall reputation of the press in your field and more broadly having to do with for example, the quality of paper that your publication uses, whether you find their books listed on online platforms, barnesandnoble.com or Amazon, whether the books are well documented or whether they're full of typographical errors. Those are all things to look at in kind of assessing whether the press is going to serve your work. Also, you want to talk to colleagues and find out who they have worked with. If there's a particular editor, keep in mind that editors do sometimes move from one press to another. If somebody's had a particularly positive experience at a press, it's always good to know about that and to take that into consideration. And then finally, when you do get around to actually having a conversation with an editor, you want to really pay attention to and take seriously the kind of subjective feel that you get, the vibe that you get from that conversation, and try to get a sense of whether that, very young scholar, whether that editor is really interested in your project, because that's really key. That author-editor relationship is really important to how successfully your book navigates the peer review process, and just how enthusiastic the press is likely to be about it. Does anybody have questions at all about this slide? I'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions too. So the first formal thing you want to do in thinking about approaching the press is putting a proposal together. Most presses have quite a bit of information on their websites about what they would like to see in a proposal. We do as well, so you can take a look at those. I should have put the first slide, but I didn't put there on the website. First, you want a cover letter, and it's very good, it's very strategic and smart to tailor your cover letter to the press that you're approaching. So it's sort of like a job interview, right? So you want to know you're interviewing the press as much as they're interviewing you. So you want to spend some time with their website, looking at the publications that they have, whether they have journals and books that will publish in the same area, which indicates a particular kind of strength in that area. And if there's a series that you're interested in with that particular press, it's good to mention that, just to show that you understand what that press publishes, what they're about, what their strengths are, and then articulate a case for why your project is just the book that they've been looking for, just the article that their journal has been looking for. A prospectus is kind of multi-part document that describes the project, lays it out in terms of its rationale, its fit with the press, what it's trying to do in the field. I get a lot of prospectuses where the description starts with a long explanation of other books in the field. And I have to go down, you might be surprised by this, but it's really true. I have to go down several paragraphs or turn the page until I get to the paragraph that says, what this project does is X. And actually, I want to see that right at the beginning. I want to know right away what, in a positive sense, your project does, and then put it into relationship with what else has gone on in the field or the current debates in the field or whatever prominent scholarly conversations you take up in the project. The prospectus should also include a discussion of the market. In other words, who is going to be interested in the project, and is it an audience that the press is well equipped to reach. We get a lot of discussions of marketing, a projected market that mention a general reader, and we don't have a very good way to reach a general reader or to identify who that is. That's what we can do is reach a particular audience, whether, and it might not only be a scholarly audience, but ideally it will be a particular audience that we know where they are, we know how to communicate with them, and even better if there's more than one audience that the book might speak to, if it's in Black studies as well as music, or if it's in sports as well as gender studies or something like that, where there are a couple different academic audiences that speak to a book, or that's a real asset. Prospectus should also let us know what the projected length of the project is, and that is an issue because every page of a book or a journal article incurs a certain cost, a copy editing cost, a proofreading cost, an indexing cost, a printing cost, a conversion cost for electronic publication. So those are all sort of page-by-page costs. So unfortunately, although we sometimes wish we didn't have to pay attention to length, we actually do. So we do want to know what your projection is in terms of the overall length of the book. And we hope it won't, if it's a book, won't be beyond 100,000 words, including everything. So all the text, all the front matter, all the back matter, except for the index, because we calculate that in a different way. We are interested to know the timeline, and when do you think you might have a full manuscript available, and what your timeline is for completing the project. If it's based on a dissertation, we're very interested to know how the book is going to build on the dissertation and move beyond it, whether with new research or a new sort of a broader chronological span, or incorporating another geographical case, or anything that can be articulated about how the book goes beyond the dissertation is really helpful for us. The reasons that we'll talk about in a little while. The annotated table of contents is just a table of listing of the contents with some descriptive text. And I'll just mention that rather than sort of a listing of what's going to be in the chapter, it's very helpful to use the annotated table of contents in a more strategic way and to show how each chapter is going to kind of move the discussion forward through different sets of material or different topics, so that it can be a way to sort of outline the whole skeleton of the book. And that really helps us see kind of what the coherence of the book will be and what the overall structure is going to be. And that also helps us, just gives us a sense of your kind of mastery of the project as a whole. The more you can do that, the better. Finally, I'd like to see a couple of sample chapters. I like to see chapters that are from the interior of the book. So chapters in particular that let us see how you work with your source material, whether it's ethnographic interviews or field work, or whether it's a particular geographical apparatus, or whether it's a set of archival sources. How you're bringing that, how you're bringing your new research into conversation with what's already going on in the field, and the kinds of arguments that you're making around that, rather than an introduction. So what I like to suggest is to incorporate whatever the introduction will be into the rationale and the description of the project, kind of lay out your arguments and your themes and topics there, and use the sample chapters to really showcase the research that you've done. A current CV, and do proofread all your materials. Please paginate your materials, which is a little tiny step that often gets overlooked, but I personally have not infrequently dropped piles of paper on the floor and then so that's a tiny thing. Proofreading, just, you know, I know that sometimes scholars are approaching more than one press at a time or more than one press in sequence and, you know, retooling the same letter, but you just be very, very careful that your letter is addressed to the press that you're needing to address it to. Because I've gotten any number of letters that after 3 paragraphs say, I'm very interested in the University of Michigan's list in food. And I think, well, good, then you can talk to the University of Michigan. Okay, well, I didn't mention simultaneous submissions. It's, you know, part of the process of determining the right home for your press is talking to more than one press. Usually, unless you're like, you have one dream press, which there's sometimes people do. It's not a bad idea to have more than one conversation and, you know, assess the fit in the ways that we've been talking about. The vibe that you get from the editor, the books that are currently on the table, that sort of thing. So it's not unusual to send your proposal material to more than one press for that kind of exploratory purpose. When a press does commit to, when our press commits to the next step, which is sending material out to peer reviewers, we do ask to do that on an exclusive basis. And I probably have this further on, actually. So I'll maybe I'll just say that for now. Okay. Once you've got your perspectives together and you've figured out what presses you want to talk to, you want to figure out the best way to take the first step. And you can contact an editor through the mail. And by that I mean email at this point. I think it makes the most sense just to go ahead and use the most expedient means. And I think it's good not just to write an email that says, will you be interested in the project, but to at least provide an abstract so that the editor has some idea and then can invite a full proposal. You know, it's great to take advantage of being at conferences to talk with editors. It's very difficult for an editor at a conference to be very to deal very well with sort of cold calling prospective authors. I mean, to have an author approach an editor in a booth and say, here, let me tell you about my project, that's really hard to navigate. An editor comes to a conference with usually a full slate of appointments that they're talking with people, they're, you know, and it serves you much better to reach out to the editor in advance of the conference, find out if there's an interest there, and make an appointment and set aside a little bit of time to talk. And that's also a way for the editor to look at the project and the abstract and say, well, this really isn't a good fit with our list for the things that we've been talking about, right? So we don't publish in that area, or, you know, that's the main reason. It's just not going to be a good fit for us. But reaching out to an editor in advance of a contrast, securing a little, even a 20-minute appointment is usually sufficient to have a good initial conversation and see if there's interest, and then follow up afterwards. We'll talk about the timeline in a second. When I talk with someone at a conference and they're talking about their proposal, or when I have reviewed a proposal in the mail and the sample material, then comes the decision about whether that's a stage to seek peer review or whether that's a stage to say to the author, this looks like a really interesting project, please send me the manuscript when it's completed. And that's a pretty strategic decision, actually, because the peer reviews that we get back are really in some ways, the most important feedback that we get about how viable the project is going to be at our press. So it's very important that the material that goes out to peer reviewers be as representative of the project, as complete as possible, and as strong as possible. We find with first books that are based on revised dissertations that it just often doesn't serve the project that well to send out a couple of sample chapters and a proposal. We often get kind of mixed reviews, mixed responses from the readers who say, well, the topic is really fascinating and the research looks really good, but I'm really not sure how they're going to handle this question, or I'm really not sure if they're going to incorporate this body of literature or this source, or how they're going to engage with that. And so we end up with a response that doesn't really say, this is fantastic, which is what we want. So it's good to kind of be prepared for that when you talk to an editor. It doesn't mean that they're not interested in the project at all, actually. It just means they are keeping your interests in mind and wanting to make the strongest possible presentation to peer reviewers. It might be that the editor looks at the proposal material and feels that it's really representative and going to work really well in peer review and going to navigate that process just fine. It might also be that you have another press breathing down your neck who's interested in the project, and you might want to move more quickly to secure that particular project. So it is definitely a case-by-case basis, but don't be surprised if what your editor wants to see before going to peer review is a full manuscript, because that really, in the end, might be the very best thing for the process. Do take a look at the guidelines and the staff listings of your publisher. Again, this is a way of making sure that you're up to date with the priorities and the staff of the press that you're interested in. So, as I said, sometimes editors do move from one press to another, and the person who might have been sort of the lone star for Latino music or something which is your project, has suddenly gone to another press. So you want to be sure you know who you're communicating with. It's much better to write directly to the editor who's the person that you would be working with than to send a generic note to the press, which suggests that you haven't moved anyone. Any questions about those? Well, I'm sure I'm not explaining everything. You just think about your question. For those of you who are thinking about revising a dissertation or in that process, or who might have students who are working on dissertation revisions, I'll just mention a few things. Now, these are very common types of revision that just about every dissertation needs. And a lot of them are contained in a number of excellent publications that you can read about revising your dissertation. But just to kind of do a little quick survey of the types of things you want to think about. I bet 90% of the people that I talk to who are going to get ready to revise their dissertation say, well, I'm going to start by cutting out all the stuff I don't need. And to me, that's like taking a piece of fabric and cutting out this and cutting out that and cutting out, and what you end up with is just a bunch of holes, right? You don't end up with a complete thing. So I think it's much better to start by zeroing in on the parts of your dissertation that are absolutely essential, the parts of your research that are really sort of key to what you want this contribution of your piece to be. So whether it's a particular aspect of casework, or it's a particular anecdotal nugget, or whatever it is, just like cherry pick those things and then kind of lay them out and start to build around them, start to kind of fill in the detail around them, so that it's a constructive process rather than a kind of deconstructive process. Another big shift is from the kind of defensive posture of the dissertation to a very authoritative voice. So, people are going to come to your book and want to hear from the expert about it, and that's you all of a sudden. So that takes a little while. It's a shift in style. It's a shift in sort of confidence about your work that isn't doesn't come quickly necessarily, but That's something to sort of work on as you're working on constructing the narrative. Also, you want to have a clear sense of your audience. So you're no longer addressing just a few people on a specialized dissertation committee, but you want to tell your story to a certain audience, whether it's an audience in a particular field, whether it's a... I think for revised dissertation, I think it's best to just acknowledge that you're going to speak to a scholarly audience, not to think about trying to write to some general audience or think in general. You want this book to establish your scholarly credentials. But have a reader in mind. So a reader, as you write a sentence, is this sentence going to speak to that reader? Is this register, this voice, going to be accessible to this reader or enlightening to the reader? Constructing a narrative arc, that's a little bit what we were talking about before. So especially, I worked for a long time in history acquisitions, and the process there is very much sorting through archival material and sorting through and sifting it and trying to figure out what it means. And that whole process is very apparent in the dissertation. And it's a big shift, I think, a big shift from that to knowing what your whole, beginning to end argument is going to be and setting out to put those pieces in the frame. That's why I'm always very skeptical when someone says, well, my advisor told me to write this as a book, so that's what I'm doing. Are they going to have to revise it all? And it's just they're just two different birds. Dissertation is one thing, and book is another thing. Prune and customized detail, again, that's related to sort of figuring out what your central landing points are going to be and building those. Only the detail that you need. So the most telling, get the most that you can, pick the incidents or the details that you can get the most out of, rather than having to stack up a bunch of different details. And again, you want to be careful about length. Dissertations usually contain a lot of discursive notes, and that's a place where we often counsel authors to think about cutting back. And if you don't need to have it in the text, you probably don't need to have it in the notes as well. Questions about dissertation revision? Oh, you guys just need to get on that. Yeah.
So, what do you think of aiming your book at
The question is, what do you think about aiming your book at a lower division or undergraduate audience? I think it depends on the kind of book that you're writing. Absolutely. It depends on where you are in your career. If it's your first book and you're trying to climb the ladder, that's probably not what you want to do. But if what you want to do is create some kind of a survey type of a book, is it a more of a synthetic book, or are you thinking of kind of a monograph thing? I mean, tell me a little more.
Well, maybe
We can have a
not a textbook, just something that would be more accessible to younger
Yes.
students
Yep.
rather than something.
Yep. Yeah, that's certainly something you can do. We have a little series of short ethnographies that are kind of aimed at that market. Yeah. So it's just a matter of really honing in on exactly what audience you want to reach and being realistic about what can be accessible to that audience. Any other questions at this juncture? Yeah.
On the perspectives, I was told it should be 2 paragraphs. What's a good length for a perspectives description?
I doubt if 2 paragraphs is long enough.
That's what it felt like, but I was curious.
Yeah, it wasn't very long. No, I'm kidding. I guess I feel like an editor can read less, but not necessarily more. I mean, but I do think you want to be sure that you want to make every word count, for sure. But just think about the various things that you want that description to do, right? You want it to really lay out the project, to talk about the source material, I think. You wanted to talk about how it engages with current scholarship. He wanted to say how it enhances beyond that. So I think it's hard to do that in 2 paragraphs. Other questions? Often, the first thing you're going to do as a scholar, or very often later in your career, if you have sort of a specialized aspect that isn't really going to develop into a book necessarily, or it's a first stage on the way to a book, you're going to want to publish in a journal, which is a great, we'll hear a lot from the journals panel, again, from the journals panel in a little while, but journals are a great venue for connecting immediately to a core audience for your work. Whereas books are, sort of have to find their way to their readers, journals go right to them, and that's a great asset. Again, it's a similar process of finding the right venue for your work. You want to consider the publisher's journals program overall. Whether it's a robust program that really will kind of be up to date with all the ways that your journal needs to, that your article needs to be getting out to its audiences. And you want to look at the publisher's submission guidelines. I not infrequently get an email from somebody wanting to submit to a journal, so that tells me they didn't look at the guidelines, because they all say, here's the editor's email with it. Also, special issues are a wonderful way to kind of present a nexus of research. Often work much better than an edited collection, actually, because for this reason, they're much lower risk for the publisher, and they go immediately to that core audience. We have a great special issue right now on Hamilton that just came out in American Music. Edited volumes is another way to publish smaller pieces. It's becoming, in some ways, harder for presses to market edited volumes. They really have to be coherent. They really have to have a clear audience and a clear purpose, whether they're charting a new kind of sub-direction of the field, or kind of providing the critical mass of work on a particular component. I also want to mention that edited volumes can be somewhat difficult from the contributor side. One slow contributor to an edited volume can hold it up for years. And often the people who are waiting are the ones who are more junior faculty who really need those articles to get published. So in that respect, publishing in a journal gives you a lot more control over the kind of rate at which the timetable on which your work is going to be published. And you're just relying on a lot fewer people to kind of get your work out there. In terms of thinking about taking on the editorship of an edited volume, that's also something I advise you really to be careful about. It doesn't sound that hard to just get a bunch of people that can, send in their articles, but actually it's very, very labor intensive. I don't think anybody has done an edited volume and come out of it saying, wow, that was a lot easier than I thought. It just isn't. It's a lot of work editing the pieces, trying to make the citations uniform, trying to get people to cut down their pieces, having to let pieces go if they don't pass through the peer review process, trying to write an introduction that really articulates the coherence of the volume. And also, you don't really get that much credit on your resume for them. So I think you really need to think carefully about it. I don't know if can you see this very well? I haven't tried to project this on the screen before. This is a great little graphic, and I know we can circulate this PowerPoint later. A great graphic that came from the University Press of Mississippi, that's their logo at the top, that kind of in a fun kind of way goes through the process of publishing. So from proposal at the top to internal review, so that's the internal group, internal committee at ArtPress is made up of staff from acquisitions, manuscript editorial, design, production, and marketing. And we all talk about peer reviews and talk about the project and whether we feel we can take it on. And so under what are caveats we might have. Submitting the full manuscript, then it goes out for peer review. Then it leads to a contract, which we can talk about. The finals, that all peer review sometimes goes through a couple of different iterations actually. The project might go out for a couple rounds of review, sort of progressively revising and refining it. But once that process is completed and everybody's happy, then we take the project to our faculty board, our press board, for their formal approval. And those faculty come from the 3 campuses of the University of Illinois. They see a packet of material about the project, and we have a lively conversation about how the peer review process has unfolded, how the revisions have unfolded, and basically how that project is going to advance the mission and the vision of what the press is doing with this publication program. We do a launch meeting a little bit later, but oh yeah, that's important. So then the project goes into production. It's the launch meeting has to do with marketing, kind of getting everybody on board with how books can be launched into the world. The cover is created, and again, for those of you who might have come in late, we have a little video over here that's a time-lapse photography version of creating a book cover by one of our student interns, Rebecca. The cover's created, the book goes out to copy editing, brought back into design and typesetting or composition, which is laying out the type on the page. And then that goes back to the author. The author reviews the copy editing, reviews the page proof, prepares the index, and then eventually we have books. At ArtPress, that takes about 12 months. That process from going into production to having books arrive is about a 12-month process. Then you can see there's a whole bunch of steps that come after that, actually, which have to do with getting the book out into the world. And we really rely on authors to help us with that. So don't think that your work is done just because you've submitted your final manuscript or completed the index or gotten the first copies of your book, because the more authors go out and talk about their work, the more readers they can actually get connected to it. That's what's really important. Oh, sorry, I should have asked if there were questions about all that. That was kind of a whirlwind tour, sorry. You'll hear more about various of those steps in the course. Are you sure you don't have questions? Okay. So the environment for scholarly publishing, as I alluded to at the beginning, is really changing pretty drastically. The historical model was that presses published books and a large number of research libraries bought them on approval processes, and those purchases paid the cost of publication. Well, that isn't really the model now so much. Libraries have, through the stresses on their own budgets and through the needs to provide all kinds of electronic resources and especially very high-cost journals on the science and tech side, are very stressed and have really cut back their monograph purchases. Some of that's made up for by the library subscription platforms, JSTOR and Project News, that house books and journals through the libraries. But it has not made up for the erosion on the print side, on the print side. ProQuest and other platforms that provide open access to various kinds of content, ProQuest principally through the raw dissertation, have made it so that have really changed the scenario for publishing a revised dissertation. It used to be that a dissertation could be very widely revised, is the term, and published in a form that was not that much different from its original form. on the argument that it was then going to go out in a more organized way to libraries and to scholars who would be interested. Well, these days, scholars can, most scholars can find the original dissertation through ProQuest, and so they question, why do I need to reapply the book? And even more, libraries question, why do I need to buy the book? So that's why we really work hard with our authors to move the research beyond the dissertation format. Print on demand is just a not really. It doesn't have anything to do with changes in the content, but it just changes the process for printing a book. So it enables us to print small quantities of books rather than printing 1,000 books at a time. And that's something that publishers rely on more and more as partly as the sales of books continue to progress over a longer period of time. And then we don't want to be, because inventory becomes expensive to keep after a while, and we just have to work to control those costs. So a lot of this we've talked about already, why it's important to move beyond the dissertation, why it's important to have your book speak beyond one very narrow audience. Even doesn't necessarily need to reach beyond the academy. That's not necessarily, but if it can be in conversation with more than one, be of interest to more than one audience within the academy, that's very, very helpful. And also, we want to publish books for the ages. We want books that people can pick up 10 years from now and still have them be useful. If we had our druthers, everything that we would publish would be previously unpublished. Of course, it's very often the case that authors are going to rework an article that is previously published to put it into a book. That's actually becoming harder because some publishers are now placing restrictions or trying to place restrictions on the secondary publisher's ability to post material on platforms like JSTOR, which we have to. We really can't not do that. And so if that's a condition of republishing an article, we have to just not include that article in the book. The best way around that is to really revise the material so that you're actually not republishing it, but you're reworking research into a new piece. Publishing subventions. A subvention is just a subsidy that usually comes from an institution. In the humanities, it usually comes from the author's own institution to help underwrite the publication of monographs. Not all universities have funds available to their faculty, and not all faculty are at an institution, or if they are at an institution, they're not necessarily in a position to be asking their institution for money if they're an adjunct lecturer or something like that, and we understand that. But where there are funds available, it not only helps get the book published successfully, but it also helps bring institutions that might not have their own presses into taking part of the responsibility of supporting the whole ecosystem of scholarly publishing. So we really try to work with our authors in securing those funds where they're available. There, that's all. Well, we have about 10 minutes if you have questions. So, yeah.
So I have a question going back a little bit. I remember a colleague who, as you say, worked with one press once it is going out for
Wait, let me just
peer review.
hold on.
I remember a colleague who was following this guideline that once a press agrees to send his manuscript out for peer review, that's the only press he worked with. And what happened to him was he was working with this press for a while, and I guess it went out for review at the end of a long process when that was the only recipe we were working with, and it got rejected. So I guess I'm trying to find out, like, what the, to what extent the publisher works with the writer and vice versa.
Oh, okay. I'll answer another part of your question actually first, which is, what safeguards are being taken to make sure that the project doesn't just sort of languish, for years on end on an editor's desk. And that's an excellent question. So what we try to do is trade exclusivity for a specified review period. So I usually ask for 4 months. It doesn't necessarily take 4 months to secure peer reviews, but it can. And then there's also the bringing it to committees and all that. So the idea there is that we're both sides are making a commitment of a certain, delimited in a certain way, so that you know that at the end of 4 months, if you want to cut bait, you certainly can. As far as a project being rejected, that does happen. But I think if it's within a reasonable time period, then you at least, But that's another issue, is the time it takes to get through this process is a lot longer than people sometimes think. So, especially if you're on any kind of a timetable, like a tenure timetable, you need to start really early, making sure that you understand, first of all, what the requirements are going to be for your tenure. If you need a full published book, that's a lot different from having a contract in hand. So make sure you know that, and just make sure you have an idea from an editor, how long this process is going to. From initial submission to sort of having a final manuscript, it's easily take 18 months, and that's actually pretty quick, because a lot of times academics aren't working every day on their book, right? They're teaching, or they're taking care of their family, or they have other obligations. So you really need to, and think about what your work style is too. If you are someone who can at least be in touch with your project a few hours every week, as opposed to sort of loading it all up into a longer vacation. Other questions? Do you have questions?
You talked about the loss of libraries covering the cost of books. So how have publishers made up that difference? Are you finding monies from different sources, or how do you address that?
Yeah, we are seeking money from other sources. We've recently been working to ramp up our development program at the press, for example. So we've established some funds and endowments in particular subject areas. We're continuing to work on that. We apply for grants. We work with authors to obtain subventions. So that's kind of on the revenue side. We also work really hard to do things like special sales. So we've had some of our books be adopted in big reads and that sort of thing, and that really can give us a quantity out the door that's really good. The print-on-demand technologies save us in inventory costs. It's a trade-off. It does cost more per book to print something through a print-on-demand technology than through a regular, what we call offset technology. So yeah, we're always kind of. But there are lots of ways that we cut our costs. We do all of our composition in-house. Actually, that's much more cost-effective for us, given the volume of journals and books that go through our press, than outsourcing them. But we outsource our copy. Other questions?
My question is about ebooks and like a printed book, and if somebody, how do you prevent somebody from taking the printed book and putting it online, and the difference between printed and a hardcover book and an ebook?
Okay. Thanks. That's an excellent question. At this point, An ebook is basically a facsimile of the print book. So the book goes through all of the stages that we saw, up to the point of being ready to go to the printer, and then electronic files are kind of diverted into the ebook stream, converted for ebook use. But it's the same document. As far as the nemesis of the photocopier, that's a big problem. Piracy is a big problem, and we're continually, our rights manager is continually sending letters to various platforms saying you must take this down from your site immediately, and they usually do, but then somebody usually puts it back up. So it's and another sort of thing that's eroded, the eroded sort of sales is kind of an ever-expanding idea about what is fair use. So, as you know, there was a very difficult case with the Georgia State University libraries having to do with claiming that that this was all material being used for education, and so it was a very broad interpretation of exactly what you're talking about. That's been somewhat moderated in appeal, but it was that current is, it's just going to be ongoing, I think, and the sort of end point of it probably is everything being available by open access, but the financial implications of that, especially in the humanities, are very, 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 very daunting, and nobody knows how that's going to work out. But it is an issue, it's certainly an issue that we're confronting all the time. Other questions? No more questions for sure. Okay.
Could you talk a bit about what authors do to promote their books and what University of Illinois does?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, one thing authors can do is talk about their books in public forums of various kinds. So whether it's a conference, or even better, if you can give a talk at an Elks Club, or a Rotary Club, or a bookstore, or a library, or if it's a performance book and you're out on the road at a gig, you should have a trunk load full of your book and sell them. So anything you can do, or if you're on social media, you can let all your followers know about it, let your friends know. Just make sure that everybody you know knows about the book and how much it will benefit them to read it. So any way that you can do that is through your networks, through your organizations, and through opportunities to speak to people.
And that question came up from some other publishers of wanting to have like a significant social media, like how many tweets you have and da-da-da-da. Is that common in most presses, or how do you look at that in that original proposal?
I think sort of fluency with social media is not something that everybody has. And my colleagues who do a lot of social media say that basically if you're not conversant and comfortable with it, you shouldn't use other platforms. Like don't try to meddle where you don't know what you're doing. It can be a great tool. It can be a terrific tool for getting the word out, particularly in certain areas where the readership is very active on social media. Other fields they're active on, and also I understand that kind of different demographics are particularly tied to different aspects of social media. So, if that's an asset that you are bringing to the table, you should highlight it in your proposal as something you can do. Whatever you can do to sort of show how you can draw on your resources to promote the book is really good. But not everybody is going to be, a social media whiz, and that's okay. We have a couple minutes, so if you want to take a little stretch. We have restrooms. I think there's a gender neutral restroom on every floor, and men's restrooms above and below us, and ladies on this floor and the first floor. And there's still, I think, coffee and tea and so forth. So we'll reconvene in just a few minutes. Thank you.